Hello friends, this is A Look in the Dark, Chapter 8, Windows, and this is the third part of Chapter 8. You remember Danny and Carol were discussing how they could go back to Stanhurst's office when he wasn't there, find out information. They thought maybe they could go on a Sunday when they knew he didn't work as window cleaners. So let's see how they work on this. As the time was almost midnight, Danny turned on the radio alarm to catch the late night news. Carol settled back to doze. However, as the third item on the news headlines was mentioned, she was soon sitting up and wide awake. The newscaster announced there were scuffles in the court and violent protests outside the court in Belfast this morning, as 3 loyalists charged with 2 murders were remanded in custody. Members of the murdered men's families were cleared from the courtroom after disturbances. Outside the court there were scuffles with the police as supporters of the prisoners protested because they were detained. As Carol sat up, she heard the words, "Police allege that the accused are responsible for the brutal murders of Sean Thomas O'Hagan, a father of 3 children. Mr. O'Hagan, aged 29, was beaten and then shot, his body being found in a disused garage in East Belfast. The second murder the men are accused of was that of unmarried 22-year-old Michael Finn. Mr. Finn's battered remains were found on wasteland on the outskirts of Dundonald last July. All 3 men pleaded not guilty to the murder charges." "That's my Uncle Phil's case, remanded in custody. Oh, my poor Aunt Anne, she must be at her wit's end." "Do you think he's guilty, Carol?" "I don't know, Dan, maybe. He was always very kind to me as a child, but he was always a very bigoted man. July the 12th was not just a march for him, he burned inside about it. You know how I told you that I went out with a Catholic boy called Mickey O'Hare? Well, it was when I first went to university. Mickey and I had a lot in common. But you know the general view on both sides is you just don't do that. Mickey was from Belfast, and one night after leaving me home, he was heading for his house and he got very badly beaten up. It was Uncle Phil and 2 of my cousins. I didn't tell the Royal Ulster Constabulary. Mickey didn't want me to anyway, because on his side of town there was not much trust in the police. Also, even though Mum and Dad opposed me going with him, he didn't want to make any trouble in my family. Mickey was a nationalist with slight Republican sympathies, but that experience pushed him a little farther in the IRA's direction. He joined up. I'm not sure when, but eventually he did. Funny though, when my dad was in hospital for an op, Mickey got to know. He worked in the Royal Victoria Hospital by then. He arrived one morning and presented my father with a book all about County Tyrone. There it is, Danny boy. Big-heartedness and bigotry side by side. That's the real Irish problem." "I can see what you mean." "Aye, and you know my dad shows everyone that book and tells them an IRA man brought it to him as a present when he was in hospital." "It's very sad, Carol." "Aye, it is. And my poor Auntie Anne has been subject to all the years of that bigoted chat. She's a victim herself of Uncle Phil's verbal intolerance of anything Catholic, Irish or different. My ma says that when they were kids they spent all day playing with the Flints next door. Anne lived just down the road, and she said Auntie Anne doesn't really believe all that stuff. My ma will be out of her mind." "Yeah, and so will Mrs. O'Hagan." "I know. Do you know there's no record of Sean O'Hagan being involved in anything at all? He just worked in a supermarket in the wrong place and that made him an easy target. They just scooped him off the street one night and he was waiting at a bus stop. And here we're fighting for the future of the birds." "Well, Danny, at least we're fighting for something of benefit to everyone. The ecosystem of this planet are there for everybody, and messing up damages all of us." "You're right." Danny put on the light, and while he lay there, put out the light, and while he lay there thinking about the work they would be doing on Sunday, Carol lay worrying about her Auntie Anne, her mother, and the ongoing violence in the 6 northeastern counties of Ireland. She always had a struggle sorting out where she fitted in. Was there any place for a Northern Irish girl who thought war was failure? Anyway, somehow she felt she had to get over to visit the family soon. Sunday morning. And very early, Danny and Carol took the ever more familiar London route, this time choosing to join the M4 near Chippenham. And as he tried to accelerate onto the motorway, Danny realised that his old Ford Escort was not so bad after all. The old van they'd purchased on the previous Thursday in Salisbury did not have an MOT certificate, but the driver... Sorry, it did have an MOT certificate, but the driver was beginning to wonder how. There was a definite pull to the left and the brakes were not great. His decision to take it to a car breaker in Bristol as soon as the job was done seemed very appropriate. The back doors made more noise than a flock of roosting starlings, and with the rattle of the ladders on the roof it was hard to hold a conversation at all. Don Blake was a good sort of mate. Danny had explained earlier, and he lent them ladders and a van load of window cleaning gear without asking any questions at all. All he'd asked was that they be back at his house by 8 o'clock on Monday morning. "Do you think of me as Irish, Danny?" Carol had to raise her voice, and Danny was a bit surprised at the question. "Of course I do, don't you?" Danny flashed the lights to let the driver of a long-articulated truck know that he was safely past the van and could return to the slow lane, knowing that and Danny was knowing that this would never have been necessary if he'd been in the Ford Escort. "I do, I suppose. I just wish it was one world." "It is, Carol. Humans just haven't caught on to that yet." "Explain, please." "Well, the wind needs no passport, nor does the Gulf Stream. Swallows and eels never report to immigration, and wind-borne seeds from Donegal grow in County Derry, as do European seeds land in Asia. Even human pollution is no respecter of man-made borders." "True, it's only us who cut it up." "Your Uncle Phil makes me think of a fairly large fish in a rock pool. Each time the ocean sweeps in on the tide, he dives to the bottom, hides under a rock and refuses to acknowledge it exists at all. He's someone to be reckoned with in that little pool, but he's afraid he'd be nobody in the big wide sea." Carol was interested in her husband's line of arguments, but she also knew that an Englishman who never lived in Ireland would find it impossible to understand all points of view. "Sure, don't I struggle with it all myself?" she thought. But she didn't argue with him. The van was so noisy it was not the place for a debate or anything. At 8:45 Carol was directing her husband down the street which passed Stanhurst's office, and into the quiet back street, and the left again and through the gates. It was a relief that the BMW was not parked below the window, but as Danny drove across the bumpy ground he really thought that the vehicle they were in would fall apart. Around on the other side of the building an elderly man was walking his Jack Russell dog, and as he passed two young lads sitting on the curb, one of them shouted, "What do you think of the Chelsea game, Mr. Danby?" Not so much, son. Keep practising, boys, they might need your help." Neither the boys or the man, nor even his dog, had taken any notice of the van when it passed them. This was London, and so much happened that was totally unnoticed, not like Frome, where even the dog would have noticed the registration of the van. As Carol and Danny got out of the van, he couldn't help noticing that she was very pretty, even when she was dressed to go window cleaning. And the peak of her cap seemed to draw even more attention to those beautiful emerald eyes and the rest of her appealing face. There was not much sound in the yard, only a robin singing near the gate, though a distant car somewhere, and a jet in the blue sky sent slightly imposing sound waves into the area. Danny was feeling confident this morning, and was looking forward with relish to what they were about to do. As he removed the ladder from the top of the van, Carol poured water from a container into the bright yellow bucket, adding washing up liquid to the water. She couldn't help noticing that a very capable husband was not so capable with a ladder. Striking the wall of the office as he tried to lift the aluminium off his shoulder and turn around, he struggled to get it to the upstairs window. He too was aware of his clumsiness with it. Neither of them said it, but they both hoped nobody was observing, because they did not paint a picture of experience in the glass polishing field. Carol also noticed things that she'd not been aware of before. By the back entrance of the cafe there were some rubbish bins, which suggested that someone might come and go. She thought that the worst of window cleaners would take much less than 5 minutes to leave the 2 panes of the sash window, and it's similar to clean the 2 panes of the sash window and its similar neighbours shining. They were going to be leaning the ladder there a lot longer than that, and it would be hard to give a proper explanation to anyone for that. She expressed her thoughts quietly to her beloved and offered a suggestion. So what was the suggestion that Carol was going to offer to her husband? Well, you'll have to listen to the next episode to find that out. Are they going to go into this office? What are they going to do? What's it going to lead to? Are they going to be in danger? Thanks for listening, my friends. Hope you're enjoying the story. Hope you can follow it. If there's any questions, ask me and I'll do some explaining. Nice to talk with you all. Love and peace to you, my friends. Bye bye. Bye bye.